So I've allowed some extra time because I want to make sure everyone has a chance to do this on their own. The practice exercises 7 and 8, which will help to prepare you for the test coming up, right? So I did promise that we'd take them up. So here we are in exercise 7 on triggers. We're using the Ironwood University database for this practice exercise itself. The scenario we're going to follow is a student registers in a particular section of a course, okay? The university enrollment table is how, okay, we register students in a section. We'll have a look at that in more detail, but basically it just tracks the student ID, the section ID, and the grade for the student in the section. But we also have to be concerned about the university section table primarily because of two things. It has the section current enrollment, which is an example of denormalized data where we keep track of how many students are enrolled. Something we could go and do a query and find out at any time we want, but we've decided to keep it stored here in addition, right? Another thing that we have to be concerned about is the maximum enrollment in the section, right? We have to make sure that as we move students around in the system that we don't violate the maximum enrollment as well. Okay, so we'll create triggers to maintain that section current enrollment, right? And of course, that'll be the insert, update, and delete operations all need to be taken care of. So I often find it helpful to have a look at the overall database diagram we provided you with this at the start of the term, right? So the university student relates to university section in a many-to-many relationship supported by the university enrollment table. So it's an example of something we sometimes call an intersection or an associative table. Either of those terms is acceptable. Note here, though, I'll draw your attention once more to the fact that the primary key of university enrollment is made up of the two foreign keys, right? Because primary key of section is section ID, which is down here as a foreign key in the enrollment table. Same thing for student. Student ID is the primary key, which is a foreign key in the university enrollment table. So the combination of those two foreign keys is a composite primary key unique identifier for the actual enrollment record itself. And there's room to store a grade there, as we mentioned earlier. Okay, coming now to the actual SQL Server Management Studio, I'd like to point out there's so much you can learn very quickly just by glancing in the Object Explorer, right? So here we see the university enrollment in the Ironwood database, okay? Here we see the two foreign keys that are also making up the composite primary key, and that's all explained right here. Okay, we can see the two little key figures as well, but we see the PK, FK, and so on, right? Note that the grade allows null, right? That's bar chart 2 to store things like C plus or an A minus, things like that, okay? But of course, it makes sense it should allow nulls because when we first enroll a student in a section, we have no idea at that point what their grade should be, so we leave it as something that allows null. The other table of concern here for our operation is the section table, and there's that maximum enrollment, which doesn't allow null, and the current enrollment, which does, right? That's going to come up in our discussion in a few moments here, but actually I'm going to make a confession. Intentionally, in my quick review or demonstration of doing triggers the other day, I did the first part of the exercise here, right? Sorry. But there's a bug, there's an issue, a bug in the code that I actually presented. And we'll talk about that today. That is related to the fact that the current enrollment allows null values. Sorry, losing my voice a little bit here, so I just took a sip of water. Okay, so let's get back to the trigger, and I'll point out that bug as we go through and the difference in the code we're going to look at today and what we did the other day. I kind of did it that way, wondering if any students doing testing would discover the bug. So please feel free to let me know if you did. All right. So our first is the enrollment insert trigger, okay, on the enrollment table, okay. So our first step is to find out what section the student is being enrolled in, okay, as the insert took place, right? So this is the same as our discussion the other day, so I'll just put the code in place. We'll declare a variable, okay, for the section ID, and we get that data from, it's an insert trigger. So the temporary system table that exists here is our inserted table. So the section ID will store that in our variable we declared first of all. Okay, now we have to make sure the section isn't full. So to do that, there's a couple lines of code, right? We're going to have to find out. But there's my comment there. I'll talk about that in a second. So we'll declare, okay, a couple of small ints for the maximum enrollment for the section and the current enrollment for the section. We get it by querying from university section, where the section ID matches, of course, the value we stored from our inserted temporary table. So we just grab the section max enrollment, but, so this is a difference from the code I used the other day. For the current enrollment, section current enrollment, because it allows null, okay, it could be null, and if we just try to access as an integer, we'll get a null, right, which will then mess up our arithmetic later on. So I'm going to use the isNull function to guarantee that if there happened to be a null value for the current enrollment in the table, we will substitute and instead use 0, which logically should stand in place of a null and allow us to add 1 to it later on as required. So that's the change. That's the little bug there was in the original version that we went through the other day. We didn't handle the case it was null, and I just took whatever it was. Okay? So now we should be protected. We should have handled that bug. All right. Next we have to check, of course, do we have room here? Is max equal to the current? So let me just replace this bit of code here with the actual code we're going to use. So if they are the same, then the section's already full, and no, we shouldn't have been allowed to insert this new enrollment record to enroll the student in this section. So we're going to roll back the transaction. I'm for now just going to print section is full, and there we go. So then we've undone the triggering action after the insert. No, we're going to reverse that and roll back the transaction. Else, okay, section is not full. We can increase the enrollment in this section, right? So we'll do an update here on the section current enrollment. Now remember our current, we've already handled is null, okay, substituted 0 if it was. So all we have to do is add 1 to that value. If it was null, it would be 0, and we'll just add 1, and away we go. So no error, no more bug. We've handled it properly. Yay! Okay, and we update the section current enrollment appropriately, and that's it. We're done. We've done everything we need to in the actual insert trigger itself. So let me just execute that. And now we should see that here. If I come to the university enrollment table, I can refresh. And of course, the triggers show up right here. So there is our enrollment insert trigger. All right, good. Let's go on to the next. Okay, so for enrollment update, we need to still make sure the section the students want to join is in full, okay? If there's space available, then we need to update two affected sections, right? The one the student has left and the one the student has joined, right? And then that is an extra step we have to think about here, a couple extra things really. So we'll get our trigger ready, employment or enrollment update, okay, on university enrollment. It's an after update trigger, right? That's the event we're responding to, so to speak. But here we're using that, we talked about it in our PowerPoint, the update function, okay? Because what if this update to the enrollment record was just to change the grade from a A+ to a C- or vice versa, right? Well, then they aren't transferring section. The section ID didn't change, so we don't have to worry about anything, right? We're perfectly allowed to do that, and our job is done. So we can use if update here on section ID. So only if the section ID has been changed in the record, if they've transferred from one to another, are we concerned. In that case, then, we'll come into our begin end, right? So I'll once again declare a big integer, but it's for the new section ID, and we'll get that from the inserted table. That's very similar to what we did in the insert, but you know what? We aren't done, right? We do need to make sure that it's not full, so we are going to follow the same kind of logic we did last time as well in our insert, okay? We'll go to the actual university section using our new section ID as in our where clause to get the appropriate section. And once more, don't forget, because current enrollment could be 0, we'll use the isNull function there, right? So we get our max enrollment and our current enrollment. So then, yes, indeed, we can check if there is room, right? Okay. So let me come down to here, replace that much. So we'll do our test, our if for the check if there's room. If the maximum has already reached the current, then we'll raise an error. This time, the section you want to join is full, changes being rolled back, and we'll roll back the transaction, right? Else, okay? And so I don't mess up, I'll get the rest here, and we'll just put it in place. All right. So, else there is space, okay? So we come in here and we declare a variable to hold the old section ID. Remember, we already have the new section ID. We got that from the inserted table. So down here, we're going to access the deleted temporary system table. Remember, in an update trigger, we have both, right? To hold the new version and old version of the record. So we get the old section ID from the deleted temporary table, and then we're prepared to do our updates on the two sections involved in the transfer. So for the new section ID, we increment, we add 1 to the current enrollment, okay? And we got that earlier, so we're fine. We're going to subtract 1 from the old section, the section the student transferred out of, right? So again, I'm going to be cautious. Now, this should not be null, right? There should already be a value because, hey, the student was enrolled here. But just in case, right, I don't want to take any chance of dealing with a null value, so I'll use my isNull function, replace it with 0, subtract 1 from it, and away we go. I know it kind of seems illogical that we might have a -1 if for some reason somebody had changed it to a null, right? But that's okay. We're handling the null and doing the right thing by God and country, so to speak. Okay, so let's just create this trigger now at the same time. And there we go. So we should now, if I refresh the table, look at triggers, now I see both the insert and the update triggers there. So hopefully that's clear enough for you. Now let's just come to the easiest one of the three, the delete, okay? It's the simplest one because really we just need to find out what section the student is being removed from. There's no limit, okay, here to worry about. So we delete them. And then, of course, we just update the current enrollment for that particular section with a simple update trigger here, right? Again, just to be careful about the possibility of a null value. I know it logically shouldn't be null because we're removing them. The same idea as we had a moment ago with the deleted temporary system table. But just in case something wonky has happened in the system, there's a null value, I don't want to take a chance. Okay, that's it. So we'll execute this trigger, or this code to create the last trigger. Just check that it's actually here in the triggers, and I do see all three are there. Good. All right. So now it's just a matter of testing. So coming back to the instructions, okay, suggestion was we'll enroll student ID 1 into section 2. We'll show the current enrollment before and after, okay? And then we'll remove them, okay? So we're going to put the data back the way it was and display everything as it should be. So that's a good guiding principle. Now, we didn't specify that here for the final, for the move student ID 2 from section 1 to 2, right? But logic tells me, and I hope you thought of this as well, but if you didn't, I'm going to tell you, you should always think about, if you're just messing with the data to do a test, put it back the way it was. So you'll see in my script here, we're going to, for the third, for the moving a student, I'm going to make sure I move them back when I'm done, okay? It wasn't something we asked for, so I wouldn't penalize you if you didn't, but it's something that you should think about doing whenever you do a test like this. You know, maybe even the better thing would be to actually insert a new record, move it, and then remove it when you're done, but we'll follow the instructions as they were given. Okay, so here's my first test. Let's talk about what I have in my code here, right? Okay, so here's my test script. I'm going to do the insert and the delete together in one test. So we're putting the data back, right? So we'll display various output values as we go through all the steps and so on and so forth, right? Okay, let me just close that for now to give more room on the screen. All right, so I'm going to make variables to hold the section ID and the student ID. Okay. I'm going to have some to capture the initial enrollment, and then how it changed after we do the insert, and then after the delete. Then I'm going to set my initial values, okay, based on we were given to move student ID, and the section ID is 2, right? So before we actually do any changes to the data, we'll get the initial value from the university section table, the initial enrollment based on the section we're using for testing, right? Then we'll actually insert the enrollment record. So into university enrollment, student ID, section ID, based on these values we set up here. Notice we don't have to worry about the grade because it allows null. Then, after we insert, we'll get the value. So we'll go back to the section, get the new section current enrollment value after the insert was done. Then, we're going to delete the record. Okay, we'll put it back the way it was by deleting this enrollment record, right? We'll get the final value for the section current enrollment after the delete was done. And then finally, we'll just show all the results. Okay, the initial enrollment, how it changed after the insert, and probably should have changed back again after the delete. And that will be our complete test as per the instructions. So there we go. That's our simple explanation here. So the initial value was 19. After we inserted a new student, the enrollment record went up to 20, and the final value went back to 19 because we deleted that enrollment record when we were done. Success. Okay, that's a pretty straightforward. Not surprisingly, the test for our update is a bit more complicated, as updates usually are. So let me grab all my code, and then we'll walk through it together. Okay. All right, so dealing with update then, right? Even more variables. So I'm going to make all these small ints to hold the enrollment figures before for the old section and before for the new section, because remember we're transferring from an old one to a new section, right? And then the after values for the old section and new section. So these will allow me to keep track of all that information in variables. Then, of course, I'm going to create variables. I could just hard code the values, but it's a good practice to make variables for our test case values, you might say. The values we're going to pick for testing, right? So in the instructions, we were told to move student ID 2 from section 1 to section 2, right? Okay. We'll show the original values for the sections, right? So here's a nice little thing. I'm going to use the in operator because I want to show the section ID and the current enrollment, okay, basically for both the sections involved in the transfer, in the test. So in the old section and the new section, that means it will include both of those particular sections. That'll just get it up on the screen so I can see the values, right? I'm going to see basically the same information though, but I'm going to store it in variables for myself this time to make sure I'm tracking it directly, right? So again, going to the university section table for the old section, we'll get the before for the old section and the before for the new section, okay, using the new section ID in the where clause of the second select statement. We're ready, so we do the update. We're going to move the student from the old section to the new one, right? So we're setting their section ID of this enrollment record to the new section, but we have to identify by the primary key. Wait a second, the primary key involves the two parts of the composite primary key, the student ID and the section ID, which of course at that point is our old section. Good, so we've transferred them into the new section. So let's go and get the after values for after the transfer is done. Basically the same queries we had up here, except that of course we're working with the after values, right? So we get from the old section, the new section, storing in the after variables, after the old section and after the new section. Okay, then we'll output all of our variables and their results, okay? And that's it. We'll show the change there. Then we're going to put the student back into the original section before our test, okay? Before our test script was run. So we'll update the enrollment record. This time, of course, the primary key involves the new section ID, okay? And we assign the section ID back to the old section, the original one that there was. And finally, I'm going to do a similar, exactly the same select query as I did earlier, just to show data directly from the section table, university section table, showing the section ID, section ID and the current enrollment. So we should see that everything works as per. All right, well, let's just select all of this test script for the update trigger. Go right back up to here. Execute that. And what do we see? I'll make a little more room so we can see everything. So there's my select query showing the section ID 1 was at 25, section 2 had an enrollment of 19. Then we did the update trigger. We triggered the update trigger with our update command. And so we see the numbers changed here from 25 down to 24 because they were removed from that section. 19 went up to 20 because they were added into the new section. Perfect, okay? But we put it back again. So once more, I did the same query to show we've returned the values to the original ones. Okay, so section ID is back to 25 and 19 for section 2, right? Success. We have officially and properly tested and put all the data back the way it was before our test. So that concludes our review of exercise 7.